Hello, everybody. My name's James. Welcome to the world where everything revolves around £10,000. Although I'm not going to be winning it, mate. Maybe my guest will be. Actually, no, he won't either because he's behind me. I just had a look at our Patreon mini league table. Let me introduce you to my special guest today, Angus McPhail. How are you, Angus?
I'm very well, thank you, James. How are you?
Yes, good. Thank you, mate. Who are you and what are you doing here, mate?
So I guess most people will know me in a gaffer context. I am 1/3, occasionally 1/2, depending on whether one host decides to turn up, of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. We have obviously been doing World Cup content as well, but primarily on the Championship. And most people will know me, I guess, for the injury news on that. And I guess being the patron trivia champion as well.
Yes, you are the patron trivia champion. We do need to have this head-to-head contest at some point soon. When I sell our Patreon and say, look, basic tiers, you can come into Slack, I really should sell. You get Angus McPhail's championship team news roundup as well. You do splendid work for the community there. Who do you support?
So I've got two teams, which obviously people immediately roll their eyes at. Rangers and Arsenal, obviously neither of whom are in the Championship.
Yeah, but you're stuck on an EFL Fantasy Podcast. Yeah, love that. Why the two teams, for those who don't know?
So I was born into being a Rangers fan, and so that was no choice. And then I lived overseas for a while as a kid, came back to London at 8 years old, was like, I should support a London team. Didn't understand the geography of London, only being 8. So I was like, it's all the same. And Dennis Bergkamp was my favourite player, so thus Arsenal.
Oh, that's fair enough. What's your Sky history, mate?
So started playing seriously probably a couple of years ago. Couple of times sort of been around the fringes of the top 100. And then I sort of do something to try and win it and drop back a bit, which
it's the way to go, mate. No one saves them ranks, unfortunately.
No, I think it was the season before last. I did the sort of Aubameyang punt that everyone was like, this could work, but is anyone actually going to do it? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And he did nothing down the stretch. So it's that sort of thing. But yeah, really enjoy it. I have to say Gaffer is the best game, but particularly when it comes to the Premier League, I think Sky's comfortably the best game for me.
The Gaffer World Cup game is great as well, actually. Yeah. I mean, mass high scoring points going on there. I played Follow the Leader this week. I won't bore people for those who are not playing it, but I've got a monster score and I was like, that's great. Yeah. And I've barely moved in rank.
Yeah.
Obviously, so many have been on it. How are you doing in this World Cup game? And I guess, how are you finding it?
So I'm really enjoying it. I had a bit of a drop during the Portugal game yesterday, which was annoying, but I've sort of been up and down. I'm at 530th overall, so it's not bad. But it's still keeping me engaged. I'm enjoying the sort of different bits and pieces of strategy. I'm like you give me something to plan for and think through, and I'm happy.
Yeah, it's the challenge, isn't it? I had a question on one of the streams I did the other day. Is like, if you can't win it, why are you playing and stuff? Like, well, I'm trying, but I'm enjoying the learning of a new game and a new format. And it is new for us, even as Sky managers, with just the free transfers per week, and obviously having to use them in that week is very different to the Premier League game. I'm 477th, Angus. I'm 3 points ahead of you.
Yeah.
Which I think gives you an understanding of how condensed it obviously still is. Do you feel you can still finish first?
No.
Why?
I think that it will become sort of more, I guess theoretically I could, but it's going to have to be sort of like some mad things like, things like being on Gonzalo Ramos yesterday sort of thing that you just absolutely gain on people because there's going to be so much similarity between teams and that's only going to get worse.
Yeah, it's interesting that with Gonzalo Ramos yesterday is basically the one we've all been looking for. And all morning we're hearing these rumours Ronaldo might play, Ronaldo might not play. A lot of chatting, obviously, our Sky community on Patreon yesterday. Nobody mentioned him, did they?
No.
And there was one person who had him in the top 1,000. There's now 3. So there's obviously 2 others have leapt in. So it tells us that not many bought him. But that's what it is, isn't it? Like, I think people are sort of, how many points are we behind the leader Angus. I'm on 434. The leader's on 499. So that's 65 points. Feels too much. But if you'd gone with Ramos yesterday, presumably, I mean, I'd captained Laporte, for example. But if I'd bought him in, okay, take away one of my 9s for Laporte and put on the 46 ahead, I've 39 extra on the board. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, I just need another punt in the 3rd or 4th place playoff or something. And it's potentially on, yeah. But I don't think, I doubt anyone even listening went for him either, mate. It was his first ever start for Portugal, but that's exactly the sort of one. If you're 50 points behind, can I still win it? Yeah. If you captain Gonzalo Ramos yesterday, you're probably only about 14 points off now. So it's still looking for that one big haul. And it's a lot about timing, isn't it, Angus?
Yeah.
And when to go against and when not. And it feels like certain things like Dumfries, I know obviously like Luke Williams disabled, he'd had him all through the group stage.
Yeah.
I think he had 0.1 XG in the group stage. It's like, I'm not having that. It's ridiculous not doing anything. Mass haul against America on Monday. Not Monday, on Saturday, sorry. That's the sort of thing that's still going to really lift you. So it's not beyond possibilities. I must give a shout out to Mark Wisdish, who's one of our patrons, who obviously won the Sky game last year. Do you know where he is in this now?
I haven't looked at the leaderboard, but I'm assuming he's high up.
He's 10th. He's 14 points off the leader at the moment. He's 10th, having won the Premier League game last year. So he's on for the most remarkable fantasy double. That would be incredible if he won it, wouldn't it?
Particularly with the cash involved, it's not bad.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Mark, if you're listening, if you win, you've got to go up another tier on Patreon, honestly, mate. How many players have you got left, Angus? Or rather, how many players have been eliminated, I guess?
So I've got 10 left.
Oh, you're in a good position, aren't you?
Yeah, I wasn't sort of like, oh, Spain are going to get knocked out, but I'd been quite high on Morocco, so I didn't want to invest that heavily in Spain. So buying Jordi Alba yesterday was the only coverage I had, so he's the only one I have to get rid of.
Yeah, okay.
Based on a couple of rumours, I might have a couple of my Argentinian players not starting. So,
go on, do share that.
So I think there's rumours that they're changing both fullbacks.
I've been very conscious of them too.
I went with Molina, so I potentially got to replace him. And I think there's been some doubt about Enzo Fernandez's place.
Thanks, Angus.
Yeah, that one seems a bit more up in the air. It seems like he could play, he could not play, because there might be a change of system, because the Papu Gomez thing really didn't work. So
actually, it seemed a bit strange that they changed to a back three sort of 10 minutes into that second half, but it really freed the best out of Messi, didn't it? And I guess that would be the temptation of why they go with it as well. Plus, it obviously match up against the Dutch, who we know will play a back three. So yeah, I've lost 3 because I've got 3 Spanish. I started with Laporte and Pedri. And I decided, rather than buying 3 Brazilians on Tuesday, I wanted to punt a Spanish attacking player. So I punted on Dani Olmo, and like anybody else, was still trying to claim the free kick that he took out from out wide. The keeper pushed around the post in the last minute as a shot, which wasn't. It obviously was a cross. So I've obviously lost the 3 Spanish players. What would you do in that situation, Angus? Because all the rest of what I've got is Brazil and Argentina. So currently, I've got nothing for the 2 games on Saturday. I've only got 8 players on. I say only 8 players on Friday is obviously good, but I've got nothing for Saturday. What would you do with that? Would you go in more for Friday, or do you think you'd make all 3 changes for Saturday?
I'd be tempted to make changes for Saturday. I'm looking at it at the moment. I've got 2 players that play on Saturday, and I'm thinking probably at least 2 of my transfers will then be to get players in that play on Saturday.
Yeah, my thought process is to wait. I think part of that as well is, so I've got Laporte and I've got Pedri and Olmo, which is not great, right? So I'm in a 4-3-3. I can't get to Mbappe unless I sell Messi or Neymar, for example. But as part of that, I'm thinking, well, if I lose Argentina or Brazil on Saturday, I'm going to be selling the money I've got invested in, probably particularly the Brazil players, Marquinhos, Thiago Silva, to move that money rather than bothering with the midfield. I'd just leave the midfield, I think. In that case, that would be my take, and then fix that up with 2 games left for all the teams once obviously we hit the semi-finals. So my intention is to wait and not book myself back in at the moment. But where would you want to go to first and foremost in your mind? If you're like me and you're thinking, right, well, I'm not going to go with Mbappe. Let's say Argentina and Brazil win. Is there anything in the midfield area that stand out to you from France, England, Portugal, Morocco on a Saturday?
I mean, the only one for me, particularly because it's quite cheap, is Chouameni.
Who I just sold.
Yeah, he was the one French player that I actually held on to. So I sold Mbappe I went Neymar rather than Richarlison. That was the sort of, again, punting against. I thought fewer people would go Neymar. But yeah, I think Chouameni, good for passes, good for potentially tackles. So he's the one I'd look at.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Neymar, Richarlison and Messi all on Friday. I might lean into the idea of captain Neymar, I think, because exactly what you've just said there, his ownership in the top 1,000 is 8%.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of people who haven't gone already are not going to. Richarlison is in 67% of the top 1,000. Thiago Silva, 40%. Will be popular as well, as will obviously Marquinhos, they've got almost identical numbers, Marquinhos and Thiago Silva in the top 1,000. Would you be thinking Brazil over Argentina captaincy on Friday as it stands?
I think so. It's hard to look at Messi and say, I'm not going to captain him.
Yeah.
But I think Brazil have the better game. And so the captaincy makes more sense there for me. Yeah,
the closer it gets, the more I'm thinking about getting into Neymar. One of the things I felt particularly watching that first half was there was a desperation from him to try and get involved in the attacking returns.
Yeah.
His fitness levels looked fine, but he knows he's watching the other superstars of this tournament. Obviously, they've had 2-game advantage on him, essentially. So I think Neymar might be the one for me Friday. Do we dare go against Mbappe on Saturday?
There's a temptation, but I don't think I'll manage it.
I think it might depend for me on... I think if Argentina and Brazil both win, I think I probably will move out my 3 Spanish players, because I think the psyche in me is I've got to get the advantage of the fixtures. And obviously, if Argentina and Brazil play each other on the semi-final day on the Tuesday, if France did beat England, I can obviously buy Mbappe quite comfortably on the Wednesday. So I'd just be going against for the one game. The problem is the options in that midfield are so shite. Really are. And obviously, my case as well, probably looking at Gonçalo Ramos at 8 million now up front and thinking, well, that enables me to go. And it might be that I look at something like that, moving Messi if he loses to go to Ramos, and then forcing in Bruno Fernandes as well, for example. One of the things I was looking at, and I think, I'm not sure this is a great idea, but I can, despite the fact I've got Pedri and Olmo, I can get Foden and Saka. With the French midfielders, I'm not overly keen. I think Dembele would be the one to punt in terms of if you're hoping for an offensive return. If I went Foden and Saka, if I move Laporte down to Martzaoui, who's a right back by trade at Bayern Munich, but has obviously been playing left back for Morocco, he's 6.9. I can't afford it. The problem I have with that is, the big one is, guess what? When England and Morocco both lose, I'm back at square one, aren't I?
Yeah.
But then that could be the same if I go with 3 Portuguese players. So I could, for example, go Pepe instead of Laporte. I can force Bruno Fernandes in and come down with the other midfield spot and kind of just leave it deadish, if you will, with a player that's just going to get the appearance points. What sort of strategy there would you prefer?
I think it's difficult because I think you probably want, like you say, you're looking at the midfielders. I mean, I started the round of 16 with Tyler Adams as a punt, which didn't quite work, but I left the money there to go from Tyler Adams to Vinicius, which felt like a nice little upgrade. But I think it is that thing where you're looking at either just sort of the really cheap options in there, or trying to get those sort of power mids in, whether it's sort of Vinicius or Bruno Fernandes, or I guess even someone potential like a Bernardo Silva, and having that coverage. I think it still sort of feels like for another round, it's sort of trying to play the game of who's the favourites and getting players from them.
Yeah, the problem is, yeah, exactly that. Because if you get them through, you've got the 2 games, and then you can piss about with it with the last few transfers. And I think the one that stands out obvious to me in terms of real captaincy punt of what's left is the third, fourth place playoff.
Yeah,
where we're liable to have some big rotations. So subject to who goes through, but I don't know in terms of looking for that Gonzalo Ramos. If England played Holland in the third, fourth playoff, for example, is it steaming to Callum Wilson? It probably is steaming to Callum Wilson or Marcus Rashford or something like that, isn't it? And hope that they obviously go off big. It probably would be something more like Rashford, I would guess. But I think that's worth bearing in mind is perhaps for the third and fourth place in the final, you want one of your transfers, I think, to steam into a rogue differential captaincy. Yeah. I think for that most people aren't going to own, I guess, which we obviously can't determine between now and then who that will be. The problem I've found is there's been a lot of talk of, are you behind, you must punt. But when we look at some of the games this week, like with obviously Argentina conceding, unless you were on Dumfries, Messi was still the go-to really on Saturday. And Mbappe was still the right choice on Sunday. And as soon as you go against it once and you die, you're back to square root run, aren't you? So it really is a case of picking your moments. At what point would you think, if we assume probably, would you say Messi and Mbappe would be the 2 standouts, I guess, because of the ownership?
Yeah, I'd assume like sort of the default almost will be them, yeah.
I mean, are you of the thought process you've got to go against them? Or are you at the point where I can't win it anyway, I want to do as best as I can?
I think, particularly with Messi, I look at it as a potential opportunity to go against. In that, with one of those Brazilian players, I think they could genuinely just be a better captaincy option.
Yeah.
But people will go sort of default to Messi. So actually, that's almost an opportunity that presents itself to gain on people anyway. Mbappe, because of the other teams playing that day, it feels a bit tougher to sort of look at someone and be like, oh yeah, that's a great captaincy option. But particularly, with the Brazilian guys against Messi, I think that's an actual sort of opportunity.
Anything I'm thinking as well with Messi is, if I'm going to go against him on Friday, which I possibly am, then I don't want him to do sod all anyway, because he will obviously be heavily captained. And if they do play Brazil on Tuesday, I'm probably going to Brazil player again anyway.
Yeah.
So am I better off going against? But my other consciousness of that is, if they lost to Brazil, I bet he still plays the third, fourth place playoff.
Quite possibly.
But then that's the one that I really, really want to punt, right? There's certain players you could think that they would still play the third and fourth place playoff, I think. And Messi is probably still one of them, because it would maybe be his last ever World Cup appearance, right? For example. So, but I have thought about that. If I just went early and went, I'll drag him down to someone. Say I went to Gakpo, allows me to go from one of them Spanish mids into Vinicius Jr. if I want to go harder for it, for example. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I just limit the damage and hope that he doesn't go off too big. And we're going to discuss some of the things we may have picked up from the last 16 for obviously the 8 teams that have gone through. No passing tears for the Dutch, Angus, against USA. Was that surprising? There'll be a number of listeners who've got the likes of Nathan Aki, for example.
I think it wasn't necessarily surprising, because I think we sort of underrate at times what a smart manager Louis van Gaal is. And I think he looked at it and was like, what do the US least want to do? Have the ball. And so he was like, go on then, you can have the ball. We'll hit you on the counter with, Dumfries and Gakpo and Memphis. But you're not going to be able to do anything to us, like in possession. If you have like 60% of the ball, you're not going to be able to hurt us. And so seeing that from the start and sort of being like, oh yeah, that's exactly what you should do. It then became sort of obvious of like, oh yeah, of course they're not going to get passing numbers.
Would you consider anything from the Dutch at this stage? Is it obviously what you've got, you obviously play and see how it goes, but would you be looking to invest in them?
It's tough at the moment to go into them, particularly because you look at it and sort of say, well, they have a chance, but you're going to be likely tipping Argentina to win.
We think that? I mean, it's a close call, isn't it?
I think it's sort of, I said very close. I think probably 1 goal in it either way. But I'm sort of tipping Argentina, so I don't want to sort of then be buying from teams that I think are are going to lose. But I do think if you think they're going to win, then obviously you can go into the likes of, Dumfries, Gakpo, obviously at his price, particularly if you're trying to move money around, could be an option as well.
Dumfries in 15% of the top 1,000. I don't think they watched the group stage. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know how I would have gone with him. And honestly, from the Euros last year, we knew what a huge threat he was. But just in the group stage, there was nothing that gave a suggestion that sort of haul was incoming. But I guess for those who've obviously stayed on, like, really well done. And obviously Blind did quite well. And actually, he's actually got more points than Dumfries. And interestingly, he had 7 tackles in that game at the United States at the weekend. He'd hit passing tier against Qatar as well, but those are the only tiers that he's had so far. He's got 3 more points, just under 4% ownership. If you were to go into one of them now, Blind or Dumfries, Blind is 0.5 cheaper.
I think you'd still look at Dumfries, unless you really needed the money. I think you'd still be looking at Dumfries.
If you were sitting there with Gakpo currently, you're obviously not moving it. But I presume if they lose, it's going to be an awkward one to get rid of, isn't it?
Gakpo to Gonzalo Ramos.
Well, yeah, 0.9 difference now, isn't it? That's the one, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I think you'd be stuck on that. But I mean, I say stuck, it's not necessarily bad, but I think that would be the move that jumps out now.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Both Argentinian centre-backs, Romero and Otamendi, hit passing tier against Australia. Obviously, if they do change system, Lisandro Martinez will come in on the left side. Romero will play the same position he plays for Tottenham, and Otamendi will sit in the middle. Does that make Otamendi a far better shout than Romero, in your opinion? Also feels like a bigger attacking threat as well, let's say.
I think that's the thing as well. Like Otamendi, he's the one that will play. Like we've seen, particularly with the fitness. And then obviously he didn't play well in the first game, Romero, but with the fitness sort of concerns, and even when they've rotated over the course of the year, Otamendi's been the one that's always played. So I think whether they stick with the 4, whether they go to the 3, the one you can sort of guarantee will play and will probably play the 90 minutes is Otamendi. So I think that's where he's the preferred option for me.
Enzo Fernandez, you said you think might come out the team. I'd have to say that would really surprise me. Was in above 90 passes in that fixture. And Rodrigo de Paul nipped in there as well, 0.5 more expensive. If you were to buy an Argentinian midfielder at this stage, I guess Di Maria, if he came back in, I had him all through the group stage, was absolutely shite. 3% ownership is the sort of one, though, that could suddenly pop off as a differential, couldn't he?
Yeah, and we've seen him before, like when he's gone back to Old Trafford, obviously be inspired. The Manchester United thing for him went particularly wrong under Louis van Gaal. So given that Di Maria clearly cares about this sort of thing, it could be sort of extra motivation for him.
Worth saying, I wish we'd kind of known this before the group stage started with Gonzalo Ramos, and I wish we'd probably known about Julian Alvarez as well. We thought he'd play, but that's a good price as well at 8 million, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's in my team, so I went with him and Messi, and obviously he won't be going anywhere for me before Friday. But I think he's a good option. I think his spot is safe as well.
What's your intention? If obviously Argentina and Brazil both win, you're only one player down going into the Saturday. Have you got it in your mind who you're looking to sacrifice?
So I'm almost hoping that someone like Molina doesn't play, and then I'll probably sacrifice Alvarez, even though it's more of a jump to Mbappe, just because, I don't really want to be messing around with Messi, but taking him out, trying to get him back, and similar with Neymar. If I can't make it work money-wise, I've only worked out a rough plan, then I'll sell one of them and potentially get them back. But if I can get away with selling Alvarez, I'll do that.
Would you rather buy a French defender or an English defender on Sunday?
English defender.
Why?
I think it's very close. Personally, I think there's more of a likelihood that England managed to just shut out the French and what they want to do than the other way around. And I also look at it and I think if one team is going to sort of, be passing the ball a lot from the back. If one of the centre-backs is going to pick up passing tiers, still think it's likely the English guys. I mean, none of the French defenders picked up passing tiers in the last 16 games, which sort of helps that for me when I've looked at it.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's only Tchouameni actually who got withdrawn sort of 2/3 into the game, who was on 65 passes, certainly would have hit tier 2 if he'd stayed on the pitch. He was withdrawn. But yeah, 52 for Upamecano, 40 for Varane against Poland is surprising when we consider as well, it wasn't like they scored after 5 and 10 minutes. They scored right on half time. So I think that was particularly surprising. My take on France-England would probably be, though, that obviously whoever scores first, the other team will have more of the ball. Yeah. And it depends when that goal comes. But I'm trying to think, if the longer it stays 0-0, who has more of the ball? And I wonder if it might be England. We've spoken about this already this week, but England's passing numbers didn't exactly stand out against Senegal either. John Stones obviously does at 85. Maguire just 62 though. There was a tackle tier to go with it as well. I think why that was England really pushed Luke Shaw up on the left-hand side, and Walker, possibly part in preparation for Mbappe, really sat off, and England funneled into a back three within deep possession phases. And that's why Stones sitting in between those three would have had a lot higher. So I think certainly Stones over Maguire, if England were to do that again. Jude Bellingham is obviously an obvious consideration for me to replace Olmo or Pedri as an example. How do you feel about Jude?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, massive fan of him. Even as a non-England fan, I just watch him play and it's a joy. He can do almost anything. Even at 19 years old, which is just absurd. I find it disgusting personally, but yeah, and
it just makes me feel old.
Yeah, I'm not even that old. It makes me feel old. And I think you look at the different avenues to returns for him as well. I think was it a tackle tier he picked up?
He did get it, yeah.
Like where it's just you look at the potential different returns for him, and it just seems like a sort of obvious pick if you need a midfielder.
Yeah, he's capable of the lot. He's capable of tackle, shot, pass, depending on game. He did it passing tier against Iran, but it was nothing against USA and Wales from a tier perspective. But it's that capability that knowing, because he's an all-round player, so almost, I feel for a Sky asset, almost similar to Yuri Tielemans a little bit.
Yeah.
Just feels like he's not, I'm not expecting it, but it could be there, it feels like, I think. What about Harry? For those really looking to go against Mbappe?
I think that's one of the obvious ones if you are looking to go against Mbappe and you're not looking to go into, say, the Portugal forwards. Let's say you're worried about like Ronaldo coming back in or whatever. I don't think he will, but if you are worried about that, then yeah, Kane's staring you right in the face almost.
He's 10% owned, Harry Kane, versus Mbappe is obviously off the charts in terms of ownership. 65%. That will obviously presumably grow again on Sunday as well. I think the only reason it's that low is a lot of people come off, say, to a Neymar for the two Brazil games and intending to go back, for example. What's your thoughts on Ousmane Dembele, 8.3? So they're the two I can kind of get, is Dembele and Bellingham as kind of real punts to replace Pedri and Olmo.
Yeah, it's that punt element. He's done really well over the past sort of 8 months, in part after suddenly regenerating, fully functioning leg muscles. You couldn't rely on him to play more than about 3 games in a row up until basically this year. And he's had a greater opportunity to show what he can do. I think there's the potential of returns there. Obviously, it looks worse from the Poland game. I've already forgotten who they played, Poland, because they became so distorted to the left side that he was sort of just hanging out on his own almost. Which
does mean if they switch to play, you can get in one-on-one.
And so I think they could look to use him more in this game. So I think he's a decent option.
Moving on to Croatia. Now, there was some big passing numbers in this one. Brozovic in the midfield area, 7.5, has been outscoring Modric. He's got a point more than him now. Over 100 passes, 115. Obviously, the game did go to extra time. He's ticked over as a 5.52, but I doubt he's not going to get the pass numbers against Brazil, is he?
I wouldn't expect it.
No. Even Perisic, who I obviously know very well, 8.1 defender. I don't know why he was priced up as defender in this game. And I don't know why I didn't take advantage of it. 33 points has returned in every game so far, either a clean sheet or attacking return in all 4 fixtures. That would be a bit fruity I know his ownership's good. He's in about a third of teams in the top 1,000, but don't suppose many will be captain in, will they?
No.
Would you consider it?
Not for me, just because I don't like the fixture for them. So it's almost a punt too far. It feels like almost unnecessarily punty in terms of the captaincy, certainly. But I don't think he's the worst option to have in your team.
I think they've got 8 of their last 9 knockout games in major tournaments have gone to extra time. I think
it's something like that.
I want to say. I think it's just the France final. I think in 18, which might be the one that's missing from that. Do you feel like this could go deep, or do you just think Brazil will have too much?
I think it could go deep. I think we saw for a stretch of the game against Serbia in the opener for Brazil that if a team can sit in a well-organised way, they can struggle a little bit to break it down. But I think they have so many players capable of doing it that the fact it has to be basically perfect for 90 minutes makes me think they'll probably have too much for Croatia.
If you had to captain Marquinhos or Silva and you're sitting there with both, ownership basically the same, who do you go with?
I'd probably say Thiago Silva.
Because?
I think they're very even on the sort of thinking about in terms of the passes and everything. I just fancy Thiago Silva slightly more to do something from a set piece. Maybe it's because he's slightly bigger.
My concern with him is, so Marquinhos just scraped into tier 2, and I captained him on Monday. He got 70, and he was on 68 for about 15 minutes. I promise you, and I counted the 2 passes. Thiago Silva got 82, which isn't hugely more, so it's quite similar. My concern with Thiago is, and it would have been my concern if I'd captained him against South Korea, was once the game's won, could they consider taking him off? But they didn't. So he feels a little bit safer now. I was thinking, when it was 4-0 at half-time, I was thinking, I'm really pleased I haven't captained Thiago Silva here because he might get taken off because of his age and stuff. But they didn't. Presumably, if they didn't do it against South Korea, they won't do that against Croatia, would they?
I think there's probably more of a chance of it, because I think the one thing for me was the defensive change they made was taking off Danilo, who'd obviously had the injury issue. So maybe now that he's got another game under him, if they need to make that change and bring sort of Bremer on, who is the centre-back, do they then look at Thiago Silva and say, well, now we can protect you? But they don't seem inclined to. They seem perfectly fine with it. So maybe it's not an issue.
Richarlison, I thought, was great. Have you got him as well, Angus?
No.
It's 8.9. It's obviously really popular. He's in 67% of teams. I imagine if Brazil did go out, and how many of them are going to get drawn to Gonçalo Ramos on Sunday, to the extent that he's not going to be a differential, is he? And obviously everyone will see the team. So if he's in it, if Brazil did lose on Friday, you'd think a lot of people would make that move. Not that I think Brazil will lose either. Casemiro hit passing and tackles, which is sod's law, because I was looking at him again. He's not doing it. It's a little bit like the Denzel Dumfries, and wish in hindsight I had. Portugal obviously play Morocco. Morocco had this brilliant, obviously amazing victory yesterday against Spain on penalties. Are any of their players going to be fit for Portugal? Because out on their feet, weren't they?
Well, apparently, I saw a journalist out there who said, again, who they nearly had to stretch her off, was walking fine through the media mix zone afterwards. Okay. So maybe it's not as bad as it looked.
Could we consider them, Angus? I mean, the reality is they've conceded 1 goal in the tournament in 4 games. Now, we know the passing tiers are not going to be there and stuff. But if you do get someone like Saiss at 7 million, if they won 1-0, he could well be the scorer, couldn't he? And it's the sort of thing maybe you're looking for. And then you've got 2 additional games you could take as a bonus. Any consideration for them? So
the one I've been looking at is Hakimi, who I know is a bit more expensive.
He's a super player.
But he's so good. And
He'll take a few of the free kicks and stuff. Yeah,
he's on the set pieces, and you look at it. I think he's underrated defensively, in part because he's one of these with recovery speed, and so I think that the tackles could be there for him as well.
He has hit it twice, yeah, and in the more high-profile games, you'd say for them defensively, being Belgium and Spain.
Yeah, and so he's the one that I'm sort of looking at and thinking, could he be an option, particularly if I just want to almost cover my bases in that game as well? Like,
but would you pick him over, say, Pepe, who's another old man, who's a reasonable price, 8.5?
Oh, it's close, but I think personally that's where I might, particularly if I'm looking to sort of, take a bit more of a punt, I might be right. Well, I'm going to go with Hakimi instead.
The other one to consider, if you want sort of more offensive, is Portugal's Rafael Guerreiro.
Yeah,
8.4. Obviously scored last night. Is another one I've been speaking about a lot. My streams have gone absolutely nowhere near. It is worth saying this will obviously change at the weekend, and obviously Cancelo didn't start, but the ownership of those Portuguese back four that started last night individually, all of them are under 1% in the top 1,000. So if you are really looking for that differential on Sunday, I wonder if it is Portuguese defensive. And I think most of us have avoided them because the passing numbers have not been there. And they weren't there again last night.
No.
Despite winning 6-1 and being able to take the piss through it. But they could be there against Morocco, though, couldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, you look at... I think it wouldn't surprise me, particularly if they're tired, if Morocco take a similar approach to the game against Spain.
I thought they started quite fast, Morocco. Like, they didn't let Spain breathe at all in that first half. And El Nesri completely blocked the passing lines off to Busquets, which is why Busquets, if you were following it, I think he was on about 22 passes at half-time. Pedri was on 52. They just weren't letting the ball go into Busquets. But it does make me think for the centre-backs, this one, they might be there. Pepe's worth the saving versus Diaz, isn't he? 1.1 cheaper. Obviously, if you can afford it, like if Brazil and Argentina lose and stuff, maybe go for it. But yeah, I think Pepe's probably the one because I think this would be the only one I'd captain him. And I'd think the passing tiers could be there. It's part of my thinking just to avoid France, England and come back for the winner next Wednesday is possibly my idea. I would be surprised, unfortunately, for Morocco if they managed to hold off Portugal again. And they were so impressive last night. What should Ronaldo owners do, Angus? There's 5% of them in the top 1,000.
They get to see the lineup, don't they?
Yes, true. But then what do you do? Because you have to think as well. This could be a game that goes to extra time, even.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably, if he's not starting, he'll probably come on. Although part of me thinks the manager brought him on because the game was done and he could just sort of do it and it didn't matter. Where I wonder if the game's tight, does he really want to put Ronaldo on the pitch? Sacrifice sort of, I know.
But they'll be much deeper. They'll defend the box. Actually, the game's possibly more suitable for Ronaldo, isn't it?
In theory, yes. I just think, do you really want to be banking on him getting something off the bench? And so I think even just something like, I'd just go to Ramos instead on the day, might be the obvious answer, or possibly going for a forward in the England-France game if you've come off Mbappe or whatever. There's your route back sort of thing. But the
one I'm looking at as a potential enabler in midfield is William Carvalho. As I said, kind of leaving it dead. If I think they're going to go through 7.5, I wouldn't want to stick the captaincy on him. And he's done nothing. He had a passing tier against Uruguay, but otherwise nothing. But if we look at how the game went potentially yesterday, he could hit passing tier against Morocco, although they may try and shut him off in the same way that they shut off Sergio Busquets. He might hit a tackle tier in that as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he walked away from that with a 6-pointer or so, actually. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. But do I really want one of my transfers to be for a player I think it's going to get me 10 points across 3 games? It's shit, isn't it? But it might be that it enables 2 other bigger players, possibly. But he's probably the real kind of cheapy-ish one, but I'd probably still go for Tchouameni over him, I think, despite less confidence that they'll go through. If I said to you money, no object, 3 Portuguese players, Where do you think you'd go?
Pepe.
I said money,
Guerrero.
money, no object, Angus.
Yeah, I know. It's just sort of thinking about the passing, like you say. It's just sort of like, I think if one player is going to get a passing in the Portuguese team, it's probably Pepe. Bruno Fernandes, and I'd probably take a punt on Joao Felix.
Okay, interesting one. Is he priced as a forward?
Yeah, that's the only
9.1. He was good last night.
Yeah.
Really good. 2 assists, 8-pointer. He's in under a percentage of the team. They're the interesting one, Portugal, where I think it'd be interesting if Argentina, Brazil both win. I think people will still be gravitated to go towards France and England. Yeah. I think in many cases, rather than Portugal. That's where the differentials are. But subject to the results, I think particularly Gonçalo Ramos might not stay as one.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think if Brazil lose, where are all them Richarlison owners going?
It basically has to
probably,
be.
But it doesn't. They can go to Pepe, depending on if they're in a 4-3-3, for example. But I think a lot of them will end up going there. And ironically, maybe I'd be more inclined to go against again there. It's kind of second thinking what other people are thinking. What do you think you're likely to do from a captaincy perspective, Angus?
I think it will probably be Neymar on Friday.
I don't like that we're agreeing on this. Mind you, I'm 3 points ahead of you.
Yeah. It's really tough on the Saturday. I think it will probably be, I genuinely think I'll buy a Portugal player depending on the lineup and captain them.
Yeah, I'm unsure. It might be Bruno Fernandes for me, depending on
something
how
like
how
that,
it works out.
Bernardo Silva, like even something like that, and just being like, right, I'm going to go with that.
But I think the most likely for me, if Argentina and Brazil both win, I think the most likely for me is probably for me to hedge my bets with something like Bellingham, Dembele, and Pepe, something like that. And I'm thinking if that's the three I've got, Pepe's the one who'll get the armband.
Yeah,
I think. So it might be Portugal defensive for me. I'm almost more annoyed that he scored last night. I think he won't score again. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, typical. Transfers, happy to share.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't worked it out properly. I'll probably get Mbappe back and a Portugal player. And then I've got one sort of spare to work out what I'm going to do with, which might depend on how the Argentina lineup looks.
I think for those who may have gone extra on Spain, perhaps have got 4. I think the priority would, you'd leave one of the midfield ones, wouldn't you? I think.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel like there's that many good options in that zone at the moment. Do you think these games will be tighter?
Probably. I mean, you look at most of them, and this, with respect to some of the teams that have gone out, there's sort of much more of a balance between the sort of quality of the both teams involved in the games across basically all the games, and so it's sort of tougher to see, and particularly the way Morocco in particular want to make the game, that might sort of make it tighter as well. So it's tough to see.
Portugal won't do to Morocco what they did to Switzerland. No chance. They've been great defensively. I mean, I would expect Portugal to go through and win. The other thing, of course, worth saying is in terms of if you are investing in Portuguese players in terms of potential differentials on Sunday, obviously, if they do win, the differentials for you for the other 2 games going left as well. There would obviously probably be more investment on Wednesday, but I imagine that France or England would maybe still be favourites over them in terms of the bookies and stuff, and therefore that might be where the investment would be. But yeah, I was very impressed with them last night. I think if you're looking for that differential, it's probably still going to be in the Portugal team.
Yeah,
I think. And we all should have bought Gonçalo Ramos yesterday, but there you go. Right. Let me have a look for some questions that we've got from our listeners on Twitter for you, Angus. Javo says, I sold my France players to bring in Brazil, which worked a treat. However, I am now on Mbappe-less. If I don't bring Mbappe back, am I guaranteeing a France win? In which case, it's a no-brainer to get him in. Right. Is there any psychological on that in terms of most of us listening? Well, actually, not most of us. A lot of us listening will obviously want England to win on Sunday. Do we really want to captain Mbappe?
I think it's an interesting debate about how how much it's sort of like, almost playing with your brain versus like sort of playing with your heart almost, where it's sort of like, picking players you think will do well versus players you think, you want to root for and everything. But I think for this round, like you said, I think that there is the opportunity to go against Mbappe. It might go horribly wrong, but I think I look at it and it's like, is he really going to haul in this game? Obviously.
What do you think the score will be in 90 minutes?
I think I had it as like a 2-1 France game, but it could easily be like 1-0.
I kind of got 1-1 in my head.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be big scoring, which again sort of feeds into the idea of, can you go against Mbappe and just not bother for this one?
Yeah, I mean, do we see him hauling massively? But then that kind of applies to most of the attacking players, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm looking at particularly the likes of the Brazilian guys, and where it's like, if a team is going to go big, who's it going to be? It's probably going to be Brazil. Otherwise, it's sort of like, do you really need to be forcing guys in, which is where someone like Mbappe comes in? If you want the France coverage, maybe you look at like a defender instead.
But I guess part of the point is with Mbappe as well. If you think that they're going to win, should you not just go and get him anyway?
Yeah, if you think they're going to win, then it feels an obvious one. Like, if you think they're going to win and you're like, oh, but X, Y, Z, you're probably overthinking it.
I guess it depends what you've got, doesn't it? It could be a lot of people, I guess, sitting there with a 5-3-2 at the moment who have perhaps dropped in Neymar and intending to go back. But do you? I guess you probably do, subject to where you are positionally. And by the way, it's not rights or wrongs. You're going to have different targets no matter where you are. Even if I know I've seen loads of, I'm just outside the top 1,000. I'm desperate to get into it and stuff. So certainly in that area, to be honest, probably Mbappe's the best captaincy choice, probably, isn't he? If you're going for first, you may want to look at something different. FPL Spartans asked a question, which I think you've kind of answered in the sense that he's only got one Spanish player and has got decent coverage of Brazil, Argentina. I feel like we've covered that, and it feels like Portugal might be
I think
now the
Portugal
differential
now
way
is
to go.
the opportunity.
Chris Smith wants to kind of second thoughts on Morocco players. He likes Hakimi as a potential tackles magnet as well. And he's obviously tempted with them, bearing in mind you've got the third place possibility if they can go through. And they, interestingly, with Morocco, although they might be out on their feet, there's every chance they would maybe play their strongest team again, I guess, because it would be such a big deal for them if they could finish third. So there is that element to it. FPL Wingman says, who are the best enablers moving forward, Angus? That's across all positions.
Well, I guess you've got someone like Gonzalo Ramos. Speaking of Morocco, I guess, particularly because the midfield is such a wasteland, someone like Amrabat.
I've been so impressed with him in the tournament, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been sort of talking like, who's the player that's going to get themselves a bigger move based off the tournament?
He's been brilliant.
I mean, I know he's at Fiorentina, which is not a small club, but like in terms of, I know I was listening to, I think it was your Q&A, and you were saying like, the problem is we know so much about so many of these players now. Amrabat feels like he's still enough under the radar that he could be that player that gets himself a bigger move.
Well, he was at one point last July signing for Tottenham.
Yes.
And it didn't.
I wasn't going to bring that part
happen.
Up.
Well, no, it's okay, because to be honest, I'm not sure how regularly he'd been playing, but as an actual out-and-out anchor, I think if I probably had to pick a team of the tournament, he'd be in it, I think.
Yeah.
I think he's been absolutely fantastic. He's 7.2, by the way, did hit tackle tier yesterday. Trackstar G says, what's the max number of points the current number one, behind the current number one, you can be ahead of the quarters, in your opinion, still be able to win it?
And still be able to.
The problem is, it's not like you're 50 points behind one person.
Yes,
it's
50
points behind 500 people. Exactly.
In theory, you could overhaul like 80 points, but if you're having to overhaul like over 1,000 people to do so, that's tough. I think personally, if you're more than 50 points behind, you probably can't win. If you're within that, all it takes is that one differential captain, and you've made a massive dent in it. So I would say 50 points probably.
Yeah, you need. Gonzalo Ramos last night, honestly. And just no one was talking about it. So you can't even be angry about it. I never thought for a moment, oh, Ronaldo's out. Maybe that's where the punt is. And to be honest, I predicted that to be 0-0. So I don't know shit, mate. Mikey's in a similar position to me. If you have 3 Spain players to replace, where are the best options? So I think what I would say is, generally speaking, most of us have got decent Brazil-Argentina coverage. You can see that from the ownership. I think waiting. Yeah. Because moving on your 3 Spanish players, subject to what the price is, if Argentina lose, you might as well get rid of Messi, right? There's no reason to hang that on. So I think for most people, it is a case of waiting for Saturday. And yes, favoritism is possibly for Portugal. But then take my case with Pedri and Olmo. I've said, because I'm blocked in there with the 3 mids, it might be that Bellingham and Dembele are just the 2 best ones for me to go and punt rather than a Portuguese one. If João Felix had been a midfielder...
I looked hoping he was a midfielder.
It's not there, unfortunately, I'm afraid. Steve's 50 points behind, so he can still win it, yeah?
Yeah.
Andrew Whitfield's is currently 27th. Says, would taking Mbappe on this game week be suicide? He's 27th.
No, it's not suicide.
It's got to be sort of within 20 points, I guess, of the leader. Leader's on 499. And I can confirm that Andrew is not lying. He is 27th. He's done himself a disservice because he's joined 25th, actually. He is 24 points behind.
It's not suicide, but you're taking a big risk.
I think I would want to go against, I think.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's you're making moves to win the game. And I think that's your opportunity. We've said neither of us think it's going to be a particularly high-scoring game, so there's your opportunity.
At what point would you say, because there's a fair chance that a few of these guys will be listening, 6th currently is 11 points behind. So the top 5 have got 4th and 5th are on 493, 3rd is 495, 2nd 496, 499 is 1st. At what point do the top 5, in your opinion, do they have to captain Mbappe? If you're right, if you were 1st right now, would you think I've got to captain him? You probably would, wouldn't you?
I'm one of these people who just loves a punt, so I'd sort of look at it sort of rationally and be like, well, I don't think he's going to return, so can I go against? And
I'm one of these people who likes money, Angus. Yeah. And I'd be thinking about it quite strategically.
That's the thing. I'm also thinking,
looking at that ownership.
If I go against him and I'm right, I've got an even bigger lead.
I think I think
probably you do have to captain him.
who do you think? We obviously can't see their teams, but top 5, that's close enough. 6 points where you only need one slight difference. Could be the 3rd, 4th player, for example. Who do you think the top 5 captain on Friday?
My guess would be Messi. Like I said, I think he probably jumps out as the obvious one to people. I
wonder if they might go Brazilian defence,
Go with someone like Marquinhos.
Or Silva. Yeah, I mean, both got sort of 40% ownership. And I think we would be clear in our minds to say Brazil will beat Croatia, and we'd be clear about Argentina beating Holland. That's how it feels currently. No doubt we'll have that wrong. But I think that's the one where you might get more of a split. I think on Sunday, because of the ownership, I think if Bruno Fernandes was 40, 50% or something like that, or Pepe might be different. But I think because of the ownership, Saturday would be Mbappe, I think. That would be my take. Ian Parrin says, we'll finish with Ian, because Suj normally finishes with an Ian question. Says, the overall Sky leader currently has 499 points, and at least 100 people are chasing hard within 40 points of the total. So Ian's saying he means 40 points is okay, you can still win it. With 6 fixture days and 9 transfers remaining in the game, what do you think will be the winning score come a week on Sunday? So it's currently 499 points. How many points wins this? Let's say it's 500 currently. So so average per round is what, 125 basically.
Yeah. So it's sort of
it's not going to be that high for the remaining 3, surely.
No, I was thinking sort of 700 to 750. Another 200 to 250 points.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think 75-ish or so. But then the right at the top end, maybe a bit more. But I wouldn't mind betting. I mean, if you have a week left, let's say the semi-finals both finish 1-1, and have, people we're not expecting score the goals,
it's like a 50-point.
It's going to be low, isn't it? So ultimately, it probably depends on how many clean sheets we've got left, I think. So, it might even be, 700 to 750, I think sounds about right, Angus. Brilliant, my friend. Enjoyed that so much. Sell your podcast, mate.
EFL Fantasy Podcast. Once I edit them today, there will be 2 new episodes out. One on the World Cup and one on the return of the Championship this weekend.
Yeah,
the proper return of the Championship. I know we had one game last weekend, but
I don't even know what the score was. Sunderland Millwall.
Sunderland won 3-0 against Millwall.
Oh, nice. Did Sirkin play?
I think he came off the bench.
Oh, bad times. Did Clark score?
No.
Bad times. Carry on.
So we'll be back sort of into podcasting that. We'll still podcast through the end of the World Cup, but then obviously we're sort of your number one stop for Gaffer podcasts. So.
You are, and I highly recommend getting on board with Angus, Dan, and nutcase Jamie Roberts on the Gaffer podcast. Did you ever get him to pronounce the Cameroon backup's name?
No, and now they've gone out. I might just sort of slip it in as a sort of World Cup. We'll do sort of a World Cup roundup or whatever at the end. Might just get him to try and pronounce it.
Ask him to spell it.
I'm not sure I could spell it.
Guys, absolute pleasure. Certainly, Sudge will be back with me in 2 weeks for obviously the Sky Fantasy podcast ahead of the Premier League return. I'm not sure if we're going to do one next week or not, but obviously if we don't, I'll probably stream, in which case, by all means, do come and ask us Sky question. I will be streaming as well on Friday, 11 a.m. if you want to come and ask me some more SkyFF questions. Other than that, just leaves me to say thank you again so much to Angus, and cue music, please, Manchild.